Is it time for Ubuntu to stop shipping Firefox? Ubuntu Linux, one of the most prominent and successful Linux distributions out there, has been shipping as the default web browser Firefox forever, since Ubuntu began, about 20 years ago. It's been the default, and that's not the only Linux distribution that ships Firefox. So many of the biggest Linux distributions in the land ship Firefox by default. But now, with Firefox's new terms of use, making it very clear that Firefox is essentially spyware at this point, where it sends your clicks, the things you type, the things you upload, what websites you go to, where you're physically located and whatnot, to Mozilla's servers to be sold off to the highest bidder, including advertising agencies. Isn't it time, perhaps, for these Linux distributions to no longer be bundling spyware by default? I mean, just look at this screenshot from the most recent release of Ubuntu Linux. What do you notice about this screenshot? Well, you notice, first of all, that Firefox is the most prominent icon in the default desktop environment. It's right there at the top, along with the trash can, the store, the help, and the file browser. What more do you need? You need those things in Firefox. And it ships by default, and it always has. Now, this wouldn't be a huge deal. Whether you like Firefox, love Firefox, hate Firefox, whatever your feelings about it, none of that really matters, at least until this week. This week, when they came out with their new Firefox terms of use, everything changed. Absolutely everything changed, because the company behind Firefox, Mozilla, made it very, very clear that they are not about respecting your privacy anymore. They are not about keeping your information confidential. They are, in fact, totally okay with collecting and selling your data. And people have been freaking out about it. Millions of people have watched just my coverage of this. And that's not including everyone else covering it, which, amazingly, for the first time in what seems like forever, the tech news media is actually covering something bad that Mozilla did, because they do naughty stuff all the time. But this was a bridge too far for all of them, so they're finally covering it. And people are screaming from the rooftops that they're ditching Firefox. They're uninstalling it today. People are posting screenshots of uninstalling and removing Firefox and moving to literally any other web browser they can find. And all of this is going on when there's more stories about Mozilla that are pushing yet more people to abandon ship. We found out over the last week that Mozilla receives taxpayer money via USAID that pays for, and I'm quoting here, engaging race, gender, sexuality perspectives. Also centering marginalized groups and building training programs for social and political change. And of course, Mozilla is famous, thanks to the London Journal, for hosting entire parties and events and trade shows focused on, quote, feminist, decolonial, LGBTQIA plus climate justice using AI. Ridiculous, but that's where they're spending their money. And so when we've got all this going on and people are jumping ship, and Mozilla, the company behind Firefox, has declared that they're not a browser company anymore, they're not an open source company anymore, they are, and I'm quoting here, a global crew of activists, end quote, with their primary objective being the deplatforming of people who are politically centrist or right-leaning. So they're a censorship company, an activist company, and a data collections company and advertising company. And they make now a web browser that's serving essentially as a front for a piece of spyware. And all of these major Linux distributions are shipping that piece of spyware, Firefox, by default. Ubuntu, Fedora, Linux Mint, OpenSUSE, Pop! OS, and literally hundreds of other Linux distributions. But I include those 5 because they're so big, so prominent, some of the most prominent. and they ship Firefox by default. I haven't seen a single statement from any of them. Not one bit. Not one declaration of, maybe we should rethink this whole Firefox thing. There's other browsers. There's Brave, there's Pale Moon, there's LibreWolf. There's so many, just straight up Chromium. There's so many web browser options out there. So many. But they stick to Firefox. And at this point, that's going to become a detriment to them. Firefox is now going to be an anchor tied around the neck of all of these Linux distributions. It's going to hurt them from the political point of view because of Mozilla and Firefox's absolutely insane politics that are really hurting them. And it's going to hurt them from the point of view of people who promote actively privacy concerns. And Linux users tend to love privacy and security. That means a lot to them. But when Ubuntu, when Linux Mint and Pop! OS and Fedora, they're shipping what is clearly spyware, I just don't see that going well. So why are they doing this? Well, if you start really digging through, you start to realize that Mozilla creates partnerships with many of these Linux distributions. If you go all the way back to, what's the date here? 2022. So 3 years back. Linux Mint announced that they had, quote, signed a partnership with Mozilla. Signed a partnership. Not decided to work together on Firefox, but literally signed a partnership. Quote, it's a real pleasure for us to join forces with Mozilla and start this partnership. And the partnership meant that Linux Mint would get something and in return would make some changes to the Firefox default installation in Linux Mint, including making sure that the default start page no longer pointed to Linux Mint's own website, that it pointed to the Firefox landing page, that the default search engines no longer pointed to Linux Mint partners, but were the Mozilla search partners, and on and on and on. And that the default configurations of various things moved to the Mozilla default configurations. And people asked, is this a commercial or a technical partnership between Linux Mint and Mozilla? And to which Linux Mint said it's both. Now, we don't know the details. We don't know what Mozilla gave to Linux Mint. Something, money of some sort. How much, what the terms are, what the durations are, we don't know. People asked, people insinuated, people assumed, but Linux Mint stayed close-lipped about the whole thing. In fact, Linux Mint in general is very non-transparent. They don't publish annual reports. We don't have access to their tax returns. We don't know. We don't know anything they don't tell us, and they don't tell us much of anything. But what we do know is that Linux Mint has a business relationship with Mozilla, a business relationship that assumedly they benefit from monetarily enough to keep Linux Mint shipping Firefox by default, which makes you wonder how many of these organizations have similar things like that going on. I mean, it's a fairly reasonable question to ask. For example, both Fedora and Red Hat Enterprise Linux ship Firefox by default. Both of those are owned and part of Red Hat and IBM. Does Red Hat and IBM have a relationship with Mozilla to make sure that continues to be happening? We really, quite frankly, don't know. But we know that Mozilla has been clinging to whatever little market share they have left in order to keep their cash cow going. So have they created more partnerships with more Linux distributions to keep that going? Or are these distributions simply shipping Firefox out of some dedication to the Firefox brand, or some in-kind alignment with the Mozilla politics, where these organizations like Pop! OS and others and OpenSUSE, do they simply just really like the extreme leftist pro-censorship, pro-spyware politics of Mozilla? We don't really know. But what we do know is this at this point, that the major Linux distributions, most of them, not all, but most, have pre-installed spyware a pre-installed spyware application, Firefox, which sends your information to an advertising company, right? That has already said flat out, yes, they're going to share that with others. Your data is going to be given to other people. And this is an advertising company which takes U.S. taxpayer money, and literally, if you're in the United States, you paid for them to do this, and spends it on engaging sexuality perspectives. End quote. What does that have to do with web browsing or open source software or JavaScript? I have no idea. I can't think of a single way where it has to do with anything technical, software related at all. But they do it, and they take taxpayer money to do it. And here's something that I find truly crazy. Many in the Linux news media, many of the major YouTubers and podcasters and magazines and tech news websites are continuing to advocate for that spyware. They're literally rushing to the defense of Mozilla and Firefox. They're tripping over themselves to tell you how great Mozilla and Firefox is. You saw all that thing where they're going to steal your information and sell it to the highest bidder. Don't worry about that. They're still the best. Still the best. You love them very much. I noticed that Linux Format Magazine, Linux Magazine's been around for years and years and years. Actually, I think I have an article or two of mine that were published by them many years back. I mean, 2 decades ago. I don't know, a long time. They published this just a few hours back, where Firefox had a brand new release, version 136, because Firefox's version numbering system is asinine. So version 136 came out, and they said, everything new in Firefox 136. What else are you going to use? And then they went on to talk about how great it is. The Register did the same thing, playing cover for Firefox and for Mozilla. The Register, and including many of these other news sites, they actually reference and say, hey, you know what? We recognize that there's been something going on with the terms of use or something or other, but then they brush it away and tell you how great Firefox is. This from the Register earlier today. Firefox 136 finally brings the features that fans wanted. Mozilla's Firefox 136 is out today. Despite recent Mozilla moves, it's still a better choice for the privacy conscious than Chrome. After the announcement of Mozilla's new terms of use, we suspect many disappointed users will look elsewhere, but we feel Firefox remains the best browser option. See what they did there, right? They reference the news that's going on so they can say, hey, we talked about the news. We talked about the fact that this is basically spyware. They will frame it in such a way as to almost imply that anyone who's really worried about this would never leave Firefox anyway, because it's the best. And it's the best even if you're really worried about your privacy and your own personal data. OMG Ubuntu, which is a tech news website that focuses on Linux and started really primarily all about Ubuntu Linux, but they do other things as well, posted this. Firefox 136 released with vertical tabs, new sidebar, and more. The new Firefox 136 release delivers a number of notable new features. Features Mozilla may be hoping help it re-earn some goodwill from users following last week's privacy palaver. What? A lot of you right now are going, what the fart is a palaver? Okay, I'm just going to bring this up here so everyone knows what this is. So palaver in slang terms, primarily like British and Australian slang, people in the United States don't use this quite as much, means, quote, a lot of unnecessary activity, excitement, or trouble, especially caused by something that is not important. Okay, so what OMG Ubuntu wants everyone to remember is that this last week's stuff going on about whatever, not even OMG Ubuntu is not even going to tell you what that was. It was just a bunch of not important excitement. It was unnecessary excitement and activity. Something that's not important. Don't worry about it. But maybe this new release is so great everyone will forget about whatever the heck that was last week, because we're not even going to mention it. It was so unimportant. That's the OMG stance. the OMG Ubuntu stance, like the Register stance, and so many other news outlets, and there's a ton of them out there if you go looking around, is basically that. Something happened last week. Maybe it's about privacy. Oh, terms of use. Here's a bit of a kerfluffle. Oh, people got upset, but you know what? Firefox and Mozilla, they made it all better. It's fine. Hey, what's this shiny thing over there? That's what they're all going with. Now, has any of the issues raised gone away? Is Mozilla Firefox suddenly not spyware? No, of course it's still spyware. It's increasingly spyware. They've been building this technology called privacy preserving attribution, which is all about replacing cookies and making a Mozilla proprietary system for stealing all of your data for months and months now. This last summer of 2024, they really got that into Firefox by default. And they've been building it up ever since, buying an advertising company and flushing everything out. Now they've gone ahead and just changed their terms of use, stating flat out that, yeah, they're selling your data, right? That these changes have been coming. They're not changing course, right? They made it very clear, even in their most recently updated terms of use, that, yeah, they're going to sell your data and they're going to collect everything you do. Clicks, uploads, keys typed, the works, right? But that's not what the tech news media is saying. And it's fascinating that the tech news media is rushing, salivating, tripping over themselves to defend Mozilla and Firefox. And all of the major Linux distributions are staying quiet about it. But they're continuing to ship Firefox, Ubuntu, Linux Mint, OpenSUSE, Pop! OS, Fedora, and so many more. Now, it is March 5th right now. The next release of Ubuntu comes out in April. There is still ample time to swap out the default web browser in Ubuntu. And there's a ton of options. There's Firefox forks they could move to, which at least would fix some of the issues, right? It would get rid of some of the terms of use issues, so that would be something. There are Chromium-based browsers, WebKit-based browsers. There's tons of browser options out there, and they can weigh whatever one makes most sense for them. I know what I like, but I'm not going to force my personal preferences on them. But they have the choice now, and they have ample time to make the switch. But the question is, will they? Will they do the thing that their user base is clearly going to want? I mean, people are leaving Firefox like rats from a burning ship. People are jumping ship quick. And there's almost no chance at this point that Mozilla can keep the ship from sinking. Right? Things are going bad, and things are about to get even worse when the major money that comes into Firefox and Mozilla dries up later this summer. Because Google's getting sued by the US government, and over the coming weeks, we're going to figure out exactly what coming weeks and months, we're going to figure out exactly what the remedy to that lawsuit, which Google already lost, is going to be. But in all likelihood is going to be that Google can no longer give millions of dollars to Mozilla to be the default search engine in Firefox, which will remove 80+% of their revenue overnight. What happens then? Well, all Mozilla's got to fall back on is their business strategy of being a global crew of activists and their decolonial LGBTQ climate justice using AI strategy. And their spy on the users and send all of that data to advertising companies. But I don't know. I don't know if these Linux distributions have it in them to disagree with Mozilla. I think they're going to stay the course. I think, as wild as that sounds, as asinine and insane as it sounds, I don't think Ubuntu and OpenSUSE and Pop and Fedora and Linux Mint and all the rest can change to a different web browser at this point. Because politically, the leadership of all of these distributions is very closely aligned with the politics of Mozilla. And if they shift away from Firefox, that's almost like turning their back on their comrade. And I don't think they have it in them to do that. Even though it hurts their users, even though it makes their system by default compromised and riddled with spyware. but I don't think they'll fix it. Fascinating. Now, I want to leave with one simple little statement that's a little goofy more than anything else. I posted this over on X this morning, a screenshot of the Windows 3.1 version of Netscape, a little later version of Netscape, and declared, "Make Firefox Netscape again." And that's only, there's a lot of meanings that people could read into my declaration there. A whole lot of meetings, and I'm going to leave that as an exercise for the listener and the viewer to determine for themselves what exactly I meant by "make Firefox Netscape again." But I am looking forward over the coming months and years to some radical changes in the web browser landscape. We're seeing some browsers take off currently and become extraordinarily successful right now in their own right, such as Brave and there's a few others out there, but Brave is one of my favorites. And we're seeing brand new web browser engines get developed and make truly astronomical progress every single month, like the Ladybird web browser. And so my hope is that we enter over the coming months and years a new renaissance of web browsing and web browsing type applications. Because I truly believe that Firefox and a few others were kind of weighing the whole thing down. Big, bloated, cumbersome messes, and most importantly, run by organizations that were heavily focused on political activism, censorship, and stealing of user data. And that's not great. A web browser should browse the web. I want my web browser to be really great at rendering web pages. And I don't want my web browser company, project, or developers to make public statements about how they're going to censor people based on politics. I don't want that at all. Or how they're going to gather every single thing you upload into your web browser, send it to a private server which you cannot have access to see exactly what information on you they have, and then selling that off to advertising companies. I don't want that. I just want a great web browser for everybody. And I think that there's a chance that that might happen. But we've got some chaos to go through between here and there. If you're looking for a great web browser right now, I recommend Brave. That's my personal recommendation. That doesn't mean that's the only good, viable, privacy-respecting, non-political, essentially, web browser that's out there. It's just the one I like. And it's the one I use the most right now. But honestly, I'm constantly evaluating different web browsers to look around and see what's viable, to tell all of you which ones respect your privacy, which ones respect your right to free speech, which ones are not out there to censor you. And you know what? And there's a lot less of them than you'd think. I want to say thank you to the Lunduke Journal subscribers. Go to lunduke.com. What you're seeing on the screen, if you're watching the video version, is the entirety of lunduke.com. There is nothing else. There's no scrolling around. There's no multiple pages. It is one page of static HTML. It's not generated on the back end by a CGI or PHP or a JBoss, blah, blah, blah. Nope. Nice little HTML. In fact, I use tables. So this particular web page actually will render well on just about any old web browser that's out there. But links over on lunduke.com for all of the different places you can listen to and watch and read everything about the Lunduke Journal. It's literally everywhere. It's fantastic. X, Rumble, Locals, YouTube, Facebook, Patreon, Spotify, iTunes, Fountain, the RSS feed. It's everywhere. Enjoy it however you want to enjoy the Lunduke Journal. But thank you to all the subscribers who make it possible for me to do this work without taking any money from the likes of IBM, Red Hat, Microsoft, Apple, or Mozilla, or any others, because I can actually tell you the truth, unlike apparently some outlets. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare shots fired and broadcast.